everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our presentation on job developers and job coaches in the workplace. My name is Julie Wood. I am an occupational therapist and OOD's Worksite accessibility specialist. Today I am co-presenting with my colleague Dustin Schwab, who is one of our career development specialists. Our discussion today is going to focus on describing the different roles of job developers and job coaches in the workplace, and also highlight some best practices for working with each during the pandemic. Dustin, I understand you have experience working as a supervisor of both job developers and job coaches. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and share with us your background and then outline for us what we will be discussing today?
Thank you, Julie. It is a pleasure to be presenting with you. And hello to all of you joining us. We are certainly happy you're here today. My name is Dustin Schwab, and I am a career development specialist here at Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. My primary role is connecting college students throughout Ohio with internship and career opportunities at employers that have positions that meet their goals. But prior to joining OOD, I worked in various roles within employment services for individuals with disabilities, supervising both job developers and job coaches. So as you can imagine, this topic is near and dear to me. Our goal for today is for our employer partners to leave with a clear understanding of the different roles of job developers and job coaches that they play in supporting employees with disabilities and also their employers. And also to explore some best practices for utilizing these resources during the COVID-19 pandemic. But first, we thought it may be helpful to review the various resources available to help employees with disabilities be successful at work. In addition to our discussion today, we do have some materials available for you that Julie is going to tell you more about.
Yes, thank you, Dustin. Along with the PowerPoint slides, you have a learner's guide, which includes more information than we will cover today, and it includes the resources we used to create the training. We have also created a fact sheet that describes job coaching instructional strategies, as well as one on remote job coaching. You can access these through the employers page of the OOD website at www.ood.ohio.gov. You can also find the link directly to these in the Q&A section here in Microsoft Teams. As a reminder, the information we are sharing today is for educational purposes only and is not legal advice, but we do hope this information is helpful as you work with job developers and job coaches in your workplace. During today's presentation, we will stop to answer your questions between main topics, so please post any questions you have in the Q&A section so they're ready for us to address when we stop. So Dustin, I know you are eager to begin talking about the differences between job developing and job coaching, but first, do you want to discuss with our employer partners some of the services available to support employees with disabilities?
Absolutely, Julie, I do. I think it is very important that employers know all of the resources available to help their employees be successful. You may have an employee who has a disability and would benefit from the services OOD can provide. There are several ways that you can help your employee get connected. First, OOD's business relations specialists can assist you with getting an employee with a disability connected to our services. You can reach out directly to them and they can help with that process. OOD has an online self-service portal called oodworks.com that can walk a person with a disability through the application process. This portal contains information about what OOD services are and includes a short assessment to help the person determine if these services might be helpful. The person can apply for services through the portal and an OOD staff person will reach out to schedule an appointment.
Dustin, that sounds pretty easy, but what if the employee has a disability that makes using the internet difficult?
Not a problem, Julie. Another option is to simply call 1-800-282-4536 and request information on our services.
Great. What happens next?
Well, each Ohioan who applies for OOD services goes through a process to determine if they are eligible to receive services. The vocational rehabilitation process includes determining if a person is eligible. To be eligible, the person must have a disability, and that disability must be causing a barrier for them to get or keep a job. Selecting an appropriate job goal based on their skills and abilities, determining the services needed to achieve that goal, and these services are individualized for each person based on their job goal and their needs. Providing necessary services, which can include training or other services to prepare that person for employment. Two of the common services that the person may need, and what we will mostly focus on today, include job development and job coaching. These services are generally provided by community partners and other service providers.
Dustin, how is it decided what services an individual receives?
Julie, each individual who is eligible for services works with a vocational rehabilitation counselor, which is referred to as a VRC, who helps guide the process. These counselors are experts at identifying services that will help remove the obstacles individuals with disabilities encounter along their path to finding or keeping a job. VRCs are all about helping people attain their job goals.
That sounds awesome, Dustin. Do you want to share a little bit about the various services OOD can provide?
Yes, Julie, there is an entire manual of possible services, and even it is not exhaustive. But let's look at some of the main services OOD provides. The first service I want to talk about is assessment. Sometimes an individual may not know exactly what type of job they want to obtain, or they may know what job they would like to have, but aren't sure if they have the necessary skills and abilities for that job. There are a variety of different assessments the individual can participate in to assist in these circumstances and help them determine their job goal. Another service OOD may provide is referred to as job seeking skills training. This includes activities such as showing the individual how to search and apply for jobs on websites such as Indeed or Monster, or even specific companies' career websites. Through this service, individuals can also learn how to properly create a resume and write a cover letter. Once an employment goal has been identified, the individual can also participate in job development services. In this service, a job developer will work individually with the job seeker to identify specific jobs they would like to apply for that are in line with their employment goal. The job developer can assist the job seeker with the application process, as well as how to properly follow up with the employers and schedule and prepare for job interviews. I'll talk more later about the role of the job developer as it pertains to employers. Once the individual has obtained employment, job coaching may be another service they can benefit from in order to be successful on the job. As I said earlier, this is not an exhaustive list of services. The vocational rehabilitation counselors are adept at assessing the situation and identifying what is needed for success for each individual with a disability.
That all sounds great, Dustin. I know this training is to help employers learn more about the role of job developers and job coaches in the workplace, but you did mention the business relations specialist. How do they fit into this process?
Julie, that is a great question. One of the most important points I want to make today to employers is that if you have a question on disability in the workplace, the first call can always be to the business relations specialist in your area.
And they are a resource for hiring people with disabilities?
Exactly, Julie. One of the things we often hear from employers is that they want to hire candidates with disabilities, but they need help recruiting them. They also have shared that having a single point of contact to go for sourcing candidates with disabilities would streamline their hiring process. OOD has 5 business relations specialists who are located throughout the state who help develop relationships with businesses to gain an understanding of their hiring needs. OOD's business relations specialists can work with employers in their area to help with this recruitment. This information about companies and available positions is shared with counselors and job developers who are working with job seekers with disabilities. Job developers can then use this information to match the skills and interests of the job seekers with the needs of the business partners throughout the state.
That seems like it would be very helpful, Dustin. Do the BRSs provide other services for employers?
Yes. OOD's business relations team provides a number of valuable resources to our employer partners, including sourcing of qualified candidates with disabilities by advocating for their hire with employer partners, providing no-cost disability etiquette and awareness training for employers, which can help them create a diverse and inclusive culture. You, of course, as the Worksite accessibility specialist, can provide no-cost consultations for employers to help them understand how to make their worksite more accessible. We can increase worker retention by assisting employers to help connect employees with disabilities to our vocational rehabilitation services, and also provide resources and information about ADA and tax incentives for employers who hire individuals with disabilities.
Thanks, Dustin. How can employers find these resources?
On the last page of the learner's guide that accompanies this training is a list of the business relations specialists along with contact information and a regional map.
That is a valuable resource, Dustin. Thank you. So, where does the job developer fit in all of this?
Great question, Julie. One easy way to differentiate between job developers and job coaches is that job developers work with the candidate to prepare and find employment, and job coaches work with the candidate after hire to become successful at the job. So the role of the job developer is to help guide the candidate through the preparation and job search phases. This involves getting to know more about the job seeker's interests and skills, educating the candidate about the positions available in the local labor market and the qualifications needed for those positions, helping the candidate develop career-seeking skills, including searching for jobs, resume writing and interviewing, and matching the skills and interests of the candidate with employers looking to hire qualified candidates.
So it sounds like the first step is to get to know the candidate.
That is exactly right, Julie. Getting to know the candidate is the foundation for everything that comes after. This process can be accomplished through a review of education and work history, interest assessments, career exploration, and work tryout activities. Areas that the job developer will look at might include skills, interests, positive characteristics, preferences, potential needs, and available supports. The job developer creates a job seeker profile to help the job seeker develop a brand that is used to best match the job seeker with potential employers. This is important as the job developer's goal is to help the job seeker find a position for which they are a good fit in terms of skills, interests, and culture.
So after a job developer gets to know the job seeker, how do they use that information to actually help them find a job?
Well, Julie, keeping in mind that every job seeker is different, helping to assist in the job search will always vary a bit from one person to another. But there are a number of common activities included in efficient job searching processes. This begins with helping the job seeker develop an employment goal and then defining the activities needed to reach that goal. This is done by helping the job seeker identify their skills and interests and apply those to the labor market so they can decide how to focus the job search. This can include developing an application template and creating a resume, conducting interview preparation and mock interviews, developing a business target list and setting application goals, and scheduling informational interviews with employers. In addition, it may include identifying specific barriers to employment and developing plans to overcome those barriers. Barriers may include transportation issues and other issues surrounding health benefits. Methods to remove barriers may include providing reasonable accommodations, such as assistive technology, and identifying any needed job site supports, such as job coaching, orientation and mobility training, or compensatory strategies.
Thanks, Dustin. When we conducted a training on supporting employees with disabilities during COVID-19, we spoke a little about best practices for job coaching during the pandemic. For those who were not able to join us, could you touch on that and maybe include some best practices for working with a job developer as well?
Absolutely. So, as far as job developers go, there are several factors that need to be considered while assisting employers and job seekers during the COVID-19 pandemic. First among these is ensuring all services are conducted in a safe manner. Most meetings between the employer and the job developer can be conducted over the phone or through a video call. Interviews and tours of the job site can be conducted virtually. Technology can offer innovative ways for job developers to reach job seekers and employers. For example, it is a great idea to conduct interview preparation and mock interviews virtually. This is particularly important as many employers are conducting interviews virtually during the COVID-19 pandemic. Another great resource a job developer can use to help job seekers explore different occupations virtually is the Department of Labor's Video Library. This library includes hundreds of different types of career videos organized into 16 different career clusters, giving the job seeker a sense of many different career options. There are skills and ability videos to help a job seeker understand the skills required for different positions. There are also work options videos to help a job seeker understand the skills required for maybe non-traditional careers. Finally, there may be times when it is appropriate to visit the employer on site. When that is best, provide the job developer with the same safety guidelines used with all visitors.
Those are certainly great tips to keep everyone safe, Dustin. I do have one question. I've noticed sometimes a job developer attends the interview with the candidate and sometimes they don't. Can you explain what the job developer role is in the interview when they are present with the candidate?
Sure. So when the job developer is present in the interview, it can be for two main reasons. First, the job developer can help rephrase interview questions into language that the candidate is more familiar with. Also, the job developer can assist the candidate with recalling key points and experiences that are beneficial to share during the interview. I once sat in on an interview with a candidate for a position working in a daycare kitchen. The candidate had plenty of experience preparing food in both her personal life and in various workplaces. However, the candidate got very anxious in the interview setting. I was not there to answer questions for her or to feed her answers. But by being there, I was able to help her feel comfortable that she understood what the interviewer was asking.
Thank you, Dustin. That explanation plus the example is very helpful in understanding the job developer's role during the interview. Before we get into the role of the job coach, let's see what questions have come in. Our first question is, how do the 5 business relations specialists maintain all of the businesses in Ohio that want to hire people with disabilities?
Good question. So each business relations specialist covers a different area in Ohio, meaning one covers the Northwest, one covers the Northeast, and so forth. So we have a database where we keep all of the information that we have about employers throughout Ohio who have reached out to us and have agreed to work with us to help hire more individuals with disabilities. So any businesses that are not already connected with us that would like to get connected with us, could reach out to the business relations specialist in that area to kind of get on our radar and on our list and start working with that business relations specialist.
Great, and I would just point out, because you had mentioned the resource in the learner's guide that gives the contact information for that BRS, and it lists the counties they serve. So if you're wondering which BRS to call, you can identify that through county. All right, the next question is, if you run into an employer new to accommodating disabilities, what can you access as an easy resource to explain those accommodations to an employer?
So again, a great resource is the business relations specialist. They can hopefully help answer some questions about common accommodations that are throughout the workplace. And then also, Julie, you as the Worksite accessibility specialist, you're another great resource that the business relations specialist, if they're not sure how to answer the employer's question, then they could reach out to you and help connect you with the employer to help give them some guidance and some advice on some accommodations that might be beneficial to their workplace.
Wonderful, thank you. And yes, we have collected a lot of resources to help with employers because each situation is always case by case. And so please do reach out to the business relations specialist and they will get me involved to help as well. Okay, another question we have is about job developers this time, and it's asking, are all job developers aligned with OOD?
That's a good question. No, some job developers. So OOD works with many job developers throughout Ohio, but there are also funding sources for job development that don't come through OOD. And so while a lot of them are aligned with OOD and do work closely with us, there are still many that do not. Okay,
great. The next one is also about job developers. It's asking, if I hire someone through a job developer, will my company be charged a finder's fee?
No. When the job developers work with OOD, OOD pays for those job development services. So there's no fee to the employer or the employee because OOD is taking care of those costs.
Okay, thank you. And then our final question on this question break is, if the candidate does need the job developer in the interview, will they need the job developer on the job?
Nice question. No, not necessarily. There are many candidates who might just struggle in an interview situation. A lot of the people that we serve may have been in their last job for 10 or 15 years, and maybe they're applying for a similar new job. But they, haven't interviewed in 10 or 15 years. And so the interview process might be difficult for them to accomplish without assistance, but actually the tasks of the job for which they're applying might be something that's routine to them and something that they've been doing for a long time. So no, not every candidate who needs a job developer will also need support on the job from an outside source.
Okay, great. I think that's helpful. All right, so that's it for the questions for this break. We're going to go ahead now and shift to talking about the role of the job coach. So Dustin, what do you want employers to know?
Julie, the job coach is probably going to be the person that the employer sees the most often and gets to know the best. There are a few things I do want to talk about before we get into the specific roles of the job coach. I first want to stress that the job coach has the same goal as the employer with onboarding a new employee, and that is to make sure the employee with a disability is able to be successful at their job. So to meet this goal, job coaching needs to be a collaborative process between the employee with a disability, the job coach, and the employer. This includes addressing how often the coach should be on site, identifying a schedule of when job coaching services will occur, and coordinating with the job coach when the job coach will fade from the workplace. The next area that naturally will take a great deal of coordination is developing the essential job tasks the employee is responsible for during their shift. Understanding these essential tasks helps the job coach tailor a plan customized to the employer's needs. We'll talk about this in greater detail a little later on. Sometimes an employee with a disability needs a reasonable accommodation. When this is the case, the job coach can be an excellent resource for helping identify the best accommodation. They are also in regular communication with the vocational rehabilitation counselor. So if additional support is needed, they can access that resource. Again, the key is keeping lines of communication open to ensure the accommodation fits with the needs of the employee and the employer. The job coach will work closely with the employer to decide how to support the training of the employee, identify training strategies, and provide training in the least intrusive way possible. It is critical that this is employer-led for the training to be effective, while not isolating the employee from coworkers and supervisors. As the employee is able to successfully complete the job duties, the job coach will naturally begin to decrease support. This is essential to help the employee become independent. This process, called fading, needs to be coordinated with the employer, with the understanding that this may not be a direct linear process, but may ebb and flow as the employee gains proficiency and confidence with the position.
Well, Dustin, it sounds like job coaching really needs to be a collaborative process between the employer, the employee, and the job coach.
That's right, Julie. The job coach is never going to understand the business as well as the employer. So customizing a job coaching plan takes lots of communication, but the savings in training time and increased proficiency make it worth it. Let's look at how the job coach can directly assist with training. So I've provided job coaching in businesses as diverse as grocery stores, distribution centers, retail stores, restaurants, and office buildings. Many of these businesses are ones that I personally have never worked in. So this is where a job coach is never going to understand the needs of the business as well as those running the business. For the job coach to be effective, they will need to gain a complete understanding of the job duties and the tasks the employee is responsible for. There are a couple of tools the job coach may use to gain an understanding of the position, which are the job duty analysis and a task analysis. Like any tool, they are not always appropriate for every situation, but both can help the job coach collect data, which is instrumental in developing instructional strategies. Also, both rely heavily on collaboration with the employer. The job duty analysis starts with identifying the job's major duties, the estimated amount of time required to complete each task, and the sequence in which duties are performed. So here, we see an example of a job duty analysis a job coach might use at a clothing store. As you can see in the job duty analysis, we are just looking for approximate times and general duties. If the job coach needs to collect a more exact level of detail, they will use the task analysis for that. The job coach can use this information to analyze skills required to perform each major duty. The job coach may interview the employee, coworkers, or supervisors to identify the skills, tools, and equipment needed. This helps the job coach consider how the task can be organized or modified specific to the needs of the employee with a disability, and also to meet the needs of the company.
Dustin, you mentioned that a job coach will use a task analysis when more detail is needed. Does that mean sometimes they won't use a task analysis at all?
That is absolutely right, Julie. Task analysis can be a very labor-intensive tool and is not a good fit for every situation. A job coach will only use a task analysis when the set of tasks is very complex and the employee is having trouble mastering those tasks, and when the job coach needs to identify the specific task the employee is having trouble with, or when the employee is not completing the task in the required time. In other words, a task analysis is a tool that helps a job coach measure the task for speed and accuracy.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you talk about how a task analysis works?
Of course. So here we have an image of a task analysis. The task analysis enables a job coach to establish a baseline for each task to measure efficiency and accuracy, performance gains, and identify areas that need to be addressed. Each step in the task analysis is stated in terms of an observable behavior. This helps the job coach pinpoint exactly at what point in the process an issue may be happening, or identify where natural cues can be highlighted or added. I'll be talking a little bit more about natural cues in just a few minutes.
Dustin, task analysis is such a beneficial tool, and it's been a major component of most occupational therapist toolboxes as well. I can absolutely understand how it could be so helpful for the job coach efforts too. So you had mentioned fading earlier, and I know you were going to talk about it a little more in depth later, but what are some things that job coaches do to help employees with disabilities be prepared for when the job coach leaves?
That's another great question, Julie. In a way, everything a job coach does is planning for after they leave. But there are some very specific things job coaches do to prepare employees for that eventuality. The first, and probably one of the most important roles of a job coach, is to identify and establish natural supports.
And so what is a natural support?
Well, it can be a number of things, really. They are any supports that occur in the workplace that all employees have access to. In fact, I think it's safe to say that we all use natural supports to be successful at work. It might be having a mentor at work that shows an employee how to complete a task, or maybe it is the supervisor checking to make sure the employee understands how to clock in. There are some natural supports that are built into the employer's system for all employees, such as employee orientation or an employee assistance program. The role of the job coach is to help identify these supports and then work with the employee to determine which supports are appropriate and help develop a plan to facilitate them.
So how does the job coach go about doing that?
Well, Julie, often facilitation of natural supports is achieved through modeling appropriate social interactions. Training coworkers and supervisors on proper techniques can enable them to become proficient in assisting the employee with a disability. It is important that the job coach facilitates conversation between the employee and the supervisor and coworkers and not become a barrier. One example includes directing coworkers and supervisors to ask questions directly to the employee with a disability instead of the job coach. A helpful practice for a job coach is to consider the unique aspects of the workplace when identifying and selecting natural supports, such as what are the possible workplace support resources? Which strategies match the learning style and needs of the employee with a disability? What is the employer's, employees, and coworkers' preferences and supports? And which support options result in or promote the employee's independence? Initially, identifying and discussing the various support options with the employee, employer, and coworkers is the job coach's role during job site training. Gradually, coworkers and supervisors can assume this responsibility as the job coach transfers their support to the resources naturally occurring in the workplace. In most instances, a combination of strategies will be selected to promote the employee's success. In addition to natural supports, a combination of additional supports may also be beneficial, such as natural cues, compensatory strategies, prompting and reinforcers, self-management procedures, fading, and long-term supports.
Thanks, Dustin. Helping an employee with a disability develop natural supports Sounds like a great way to support them in becoming independent and successful at work. You mentioned a number of other supports a job coach can help implement. Can you share some of those and explain how the employer can offer support?
Absolutely, Julie. And I do want to keep stressing that all of these supports will be much more effective when implemented in a collaborative manner with the employee, job coach, and employer. For example, the next support we are going to talk about is often something the employer has put in place for their employee anyway, and that is natural cues. Natural cues are some feature of the work environment, job tasks, or activities which signals to an employee what to do next. Think of the buzzer going off in a bakery to let the baker know when to take the bread out of the oven. That is a natural cue for an employee that an employee can hear. It could also be an indicator light on a washing machine or the buzzer on the service door, the telephone ringing, or an announcement over a loudspeaker. A natural cue is one that the employee can see, hear, touch, feel, or smell, and has not changed or added to the worksite by the job coach. The role of the job coach is to work with the employer to understand the natural cues at the worksite and assist the employee with the disability in identifying and reacting to natural cues appropriately.
Dustin, assisting the employee with identifying these natural cues sounds like a great way to enable the employee to perform the job and navigate the workplace. But what if the employee's disability limits their ability to perform a task in the environment the same way as other employees?
Julie, that's another great question. When a change is made in the environment or with the employee's behavior to enable the employee to accomplish a task in another way due to a limitation related to the disability, we call that a compensatory strategy. A job coach may add compensatory strategies to job site training to enhance an employee's ability to learn and perform work tasks independently. One example is placing a laminated sign over a dishwashing station which indicates the water temperatures required for washing and rinsing dishes. Another example would be if a person instructs customers when they enter a store. They might have difficulty remembering what to tell the customers, so a job coach might work with the employer and the employee to develop a script for the employee to memorize. In some instances, using a compensatory strategy can eliminate instruction and enable the employee to perform activities that otherwise they could not.
Dustin, do you have an example of an actual situation where a compensatory strategy was used?
Of course, Julie. A job coach was working with an employee at a YMCA who was in charge of cleaning the exercise machines and locker rooms. Although he did very well at each individual task, he had trouble remembering which task to begin after finishing the last. For example, after cleaning a locker room, he would go and ask the supervisor what to do next. The job coach created a small flip chart with the order of tasks that he could keep on his cleaning cart. After he had the flip chart, the job coach was able to fade completely from the site as the employee was able to complete the tasks independently. I would point out that it is important that all compensatory strategies be designed with input from the employee with a disability, the employer, and the coworkers. Getting input early on will greatly help with not having to retrain later on. In addition, care should be given to the design and construction of materials to ensure they do not stigmatize the employee. Materials should be accessible for all employees in the work environment and be accepted by the work culture where they are used.
Okay, so compensatory strategies sound like another great way to help the employee become independent. But during the process of learning the job's essential functions, are there strategies the job coach uses when instructing the employee?
Yes, but I do want to point out these strategies need to be designed and implemented in a way that do not cause overdependence on the job coach. So the job coach is going to use a few techniques to help the employee learn new tasks. The first is prompting. When an employee is unsure of the next step in a task and a job coach provides direction, that is known as prompting. There are several types of prompting, which can include verbal prompts, gestures, modeling, and partial physical assistance. The best practice is to provide prompting in the least intrusive manner possible for task completion. In other words, if a verbal prompt is sufficient, it is better than moving on to a more intrusive prompt, such as using partial physical assistance. So, for example, if a job coach is working with an employee with a disability to learn the different areas of a distribution center, the employee says they forget where the pick and pack area is. The job coach may ask, well, how did your supervisor tell you to find the different areas? In order to prompt the employee to look at the floor map rather than walk the employee directly over to the pick and pack area. Then, as the employee begins to master the task, the job coach will provide less direction, which promotes the employee to become independent with each task. Job coaches will also make use of reinforcers. Reinforcers are the positive effects resulting from successful task performance and are most effective when they occur naturally. Some examples of reinforcers include coworker praise, supervisor approval, positive written evaluations, pay raises or bonuses, and so forth. So in some instances, a naturally occurring reinforcer will not happen with enough frequency for the employee to understand the relationship between the reinforcer and the work task. For example, though many of us are reinforced by a paycheck after a certain period of work, some employees may have a difficult time recognizing or remembering that that paycheck is coming as a result of the work they're doing today. Therefore, a job coach may use a more tangible reinforcer and then gradually fade the reinforcer as the naturally occurring ones become more meaningful. So an example of this, we occasionally work with employees who want to take more frequent breaks than are allotted by their employers. In order to encourage these employees or an employee like this to continue their work until their scheduled break time, we find ways to reinforce them during their breaks for their hard work. So I've worked with employees in the past who really enjoy talking with loved ones during their work days who might not be available for them when they are finished working. So in this case, a job coach might work with the employer and the employee to determine a time that the loved one is available to talk and arrange their break schedule so that they can have that reinforcement for their work during their break.
Those sound like excellent techniques for a job coach to help an employee become proficient at their work tasks. You've mentioned at some point the job coach is going to fade from the workplace and the employee will need to be able to perform the job independently. What strategies are available to help the employee remain independent after the job coach has left the workplace?
Julie, in a way, everything the job coach is doing is geared toward helping the employee prepare to work independently. But part of that will be to work with the employee on self-management procedures. Self-management usually entails instructing the employee to independently self-monitor by using natural cues, external cues and prompts, and compensatory strategies. It is taking everything that has been worked on previously and putting it into practice independently. This instruction can be provided by the job coach, coworkers, or the supervisor, depending on the situation. So, for example, a coworker may instruct the employee in using a timer to monitor their production rate, or instruct the employee on how to create a checklist to mark off tasks as they are completed. In addition, employees who have difficulty telling time might set alarms on their watches to remind them when it is time for a break or to leave at the end of the day. Some employees might work with a job developer if they need assistance remembering their information to clock in or out, or might have a spot near the time clock in which they keep a reminder. And the job coach might assist the employee in developing a self-reinforcement strategy to use when they meet a production standard, such as having a snack on an afternoon break if all work tasks are complete up to that point. Part of this process is for the job coach to work with coworkers and supervisors so they understand the process of providing direction in the least intrusive way in order to foster independence.
So Dustin, you've discussed quite a bit about assisting an employee to become independent at work. How does the job coach transition away from the workplace? Does it happen all at once? And does the employer have any input as to when that happens?
Julie, that's a very important part of job coaching to address. If there is a single overriding principle of job coaching, it is that all instruction should be conducted in a way that leads to the employee being able to work independently. This process is called fading and begins much earlier than when the job coach actually leaves the work site. As the employee is able to accomplish tasks independently, the job coach will gradually decrease their instruction with the employee. As an employer, you may notice that as an employee is becoming more proficient with their job tasks, that the job coach is gradually working less closely with the individual. Some employers have called the job coach before with the concern that the job coach was not being as attentive to the employee as they were at the beginning of the process. Again, this is why communication is critical, so everyone understands where we are in the process. A job coach that does not fade from working with the employee as quickly as warranted can lead to the employee developing a dependency on the job coach. So the job coach will create a fading plan directed by the employee and with input from the employer. It is important for the employer to be engaged with the process so they can provide support if needed, as the job coach spends less time at the business. Every situation is different, so the process of fading will always be a little different. Often the job coach will be on site for the entire shift in the beginning and then fade as the employee becomes more efficient with the job tasks. But there may be considerations of the employer that need to be taken into account. It may be difficult in some workplaces for the job coach to just stop by in the middle of the shift, especially in companies that have controlled access points, which this is common in distribution centers where employees need to have badges to enter through secure entry points. On the other hand, the employee may have a need for job coaching support at different periods during their shifts. For example, a job coach was working with an employee with a disability at a restaurant where the employee's job included preparing food in the kitchen. It did not take the employee long to master the tasks once they got going, but remembering how to get started was a challenge. The job coach and the employee together developed a checklist the employee could use after clocking in. Until this was mastered, the job coach faded to just coming in for the first hour of the employee's shift. On the other hand, a job coach was working with an employee at a distribution center who, because of his disability, had not worked in a number of years. As the employee was increasing his endurance for working an 8-hour day, he would get tired toward the end of his shift and begin to make mistakes. In this case, the job coach found it more beneficial to come in and work with the employee for the last 2 hours of the shift. Eventually, as the employee's endurance grew, the job coach was able to fade to coming on site to work with the employee during his last hour and then fade altogether. In both cases, these strategies were discussed with the frontline supervisor. As the employer, you should not be surprised when the coach is on site or not. This should be clearly communicated so there are no surprises. But I do want to point out that job coaching is not always a straight line process. The job coaching plan may call for the coach to be faded, but if the employee needs additional support, they may return early or more often. The key, as with most parts of the process, is open communication between the job coach, employee, and employer.
So what happens after the job coach leaves? Is that the end of any support for the employee?
So the term for the supports that occur after a job coach has completely faded from a work site is long-term supports. There are a number of long-term supports that may be appropriate for an employee with a disability. So to begin with, I want to remind everyone that OOD is committed to both helping individuals with disabilities find employment and also to help individuals with disabilities who are employed to retain employment. Job coaches are often brought back to a work site to facilitate job changes train on new skills, or for crisis intervention. Normally, a case at OOD remains open for 90 days past the time that a job coach fades to anticipate the possible need for additional support and to be able to rapidly respond. But in any case, if an employee with a disability in Ohio needs support to retain employment, OOD is committed to helping.
Dustin, that's a great point to make about how OOD is here to assist individuals in both finding employment and maintaining employment. So, do you have an example of when a job coach has returned to the job site to provide additional support?
Yes, of course. So, a job coach was brought in to be a part of a team that helped an employee with low vision find a job at a coffee shop. One of the services that OOD provided initially was to have a low vision specialist come in and do an assessment. The specialist was able to identify some assistive technology to help the employee become successful and even provided some training to help the job coach on the technology.
Interesting. What kind of technology?
So the low vision specialist identified a number of devices that helped the employee be successful, including a device called a liquid indicator, which has two prongs you put over the lip of a coffee cup that beeps when it is full. Also, a money reader that identifies the bill that you're being handed. A device called a pen friend that identifies different products. This was particularly helpful as the employee had to be able to distinguish between different types of coffee flavoring syrups that were all in the same sized bottle. And also an electronic magnifying device that helped him use the cash register, which was an older manual type of machine.
That sounds amazing.
It really was. And with some initial coaching, the employee was able to become very successful. Almost a year later, the company finally decided to upgrade from that old manual cash register to a computer-based point-of-sale system. So this was proving difficult for the employee because he could not just memorize the keypad, but had to be able to interact with the screen.
Oh no, so what happened?
Well, his OOD counselor called the job coach to ask for help, and the job coach returned to the worksite. Because the new point of sale system was PC based, a program called Zoom Text was installed. Zoom Text is a magnification software, and it helped the employee to be able to view the computer screen. The job coach worked with the employee for about a week, helping him to learn the new system, and then the employee was able to work independently after that.
Wow, that's great. So the job coach was called back in because of a change at the work site.
Yes, that's actually pretty common. Additional supports are often needed because of a change in technology, changes in work duties like moving departments or being promoted, or because of changes in the nature or severity of a disability.
That's great, Dustin. And what you said about change is true of all types of reasonable accommodations. Really, anytime there is a change at work or with an employee's disability, there may also need to be a change to the reasonable accommodation. And so I think that's a great point to highlight. Speaking of reasonable accommodations, let's talk about job coaching as a form of reasonable accommodation.
Sure, Julie. But first of all, I do want to recognize that not all work sites are appropriate for having a job coach on site. If an employee is requesting a job coach because of a disability, you should engage in the interactive process to determine if it is a reasonable accommodation. If you were not able to attend, I would highly suggest watching the archived training on navigating the reasonable accommodation process recently hosted by OOD. This can be found on the employer's page at ood.ohio.gov. Julie, will you clarify for us exactly how using a job coach can be a form of a reasonable accommodation?
Sure, Dustin. Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act requires covered employers to provide reasonable accommodations for qualified employees with disabilities, unless doing so causes an undue hardship. And there are several categories of reasonable accommodations, such as providing equipment or making the work environment itself accessible or providing a flexible schedule. The category of reasonable accommodation that job coaching fits into is modifying a policy. Many employers have training policies that inform how training is to be conducted for a specific job. And so to permit the use of a job coach, the training policy may need to be modified. So it's that modification of the policy that is actually the reasonable accommodation. And when using a job coach is considered a reasonable way to provide effective training, it is a great reasonable accommodation to use.
Yes, Julie, you are of course correct. And modifying the training policy to permit the use of a job coach is a common type of reasonable accommodation that is very effective in enabling an employee with a disability to be successful at work, because job coaches specialize in assisting employees with disabilities to learn and accurately perform job duties, and they can provide one-on-one training tailored to the needs of the employee. The process begins with the job coach completing a job analysis to identify work tasks, and finally, the job coach works collaboratively with the employer to customize a plan to train the employee to work independently and perform work tasks effectively.
So Dustin, it sounds like on-site job coaching really can offer many benefits for employers. Can you tell us more about these benefits?
Yes. So having a job coach on site offers several benefits for the employer. First, and very possibly the biggest benefit to an employer, is the message you send to your employees that you are committed to their success. Around 1 in 5 Americans has a disability, which means that almost all of your employees either have a disability or have a close friend or family member who does. Being open to supporting employees with disabilities lets everyone know that you care about their success. There are also some more practical reasons for being open to job coaches. The process of recruiting, training, and retaining a new employee is both a commitment of time and expense for employers. Job coaching can support the success of these efforts by enabling the employee with a disability to become a successful member of your team. Some examples of the benefits of using a job coach include assisting with training according to the employer standards, identifying cost-effective assistive technology, and analyzing job site and job tasks to identify supports.
Those are certainly great benefits. Dustin, would you share with us some examples of a successful job coaching scenario?
Absolutely. And I will just say that in the Learner's Guide, we have included a few examples of successful job coaching scenarios that we pulled from the Job Accommodations Network. So let me share a quick story from a fellow job coach. The job coach was asked to work with a gentleman with an intellectual disability. The gentleman spent most of his days sitting in front of a TV, did not engage in any type of activities, although a day center was available to him. The job coach was able to find him a position in a retail clothing store, unloading boxes as they came off the truck and loading them onto carts per the area of the store the product was to be stocked. Because the employee had a difficult time reading code on the product label, he was having trouble putting the correct product on the correct cart. The job coach figured out that the product had colored dots that corresponded to the area they needed to go. So the job coach added colored discs to the carts per the areas they went to. In a week, no one in the store even looked at the product labels ever again. Everyone just used the color-coded system, and the entire store was more efficient.
Wow, Dustin, that's a great success story. And I really like how the process improvement benefited everyone.
Julie, that's actually very common. We often find that when we simplify a process to help an employee with a disability, it turns out to make the entire team more efficient.
That's a great point. So Dustin, these examples really help us all understand how job coaching is beneficial. Can you share one more with us?
Absolutely, Julie. This is an example from the Job Accommodations Network, and it's about an employee with post-traumatic stress disorder and a traumatic brain injury. The employee recently returned to work as a customer service representative and was experiencing difficulties with memory and mood regulation. A job coach was coordinated to work with the employee and help him transition back into his position. Through coordinating with both the employee and the employer, these are the strategies the job coach implemented with the employee. Together, they developed a customized form for taking notes when talking with customers. They created a system for organizing the employee's workspace. The job coach also suggested the employee send his supervisor an email when he has a question so that when his supervisor responds, the employee will have a written record to reference as needed. Also, to manage his stress and decrease the likelihood of experiencing an emotional outburst during his shift, the job coach helped the employee to incorporate breaks into his workday to do breathing exercises. The job coach came to the workplace twice a week for 3 weeks and then was able to fade from the work environment, and the employee was successful in performing his job duties.
Thank you, Dustin. That example really demonstrates the variety of supports available to be used with job coaching. One additional support we have discussed in previous trainings is the use of remote job coaching as a strategy during the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you want to touch on this here?
Yes, Julie, that's right. In our June training, Supporting Employees with Disabilities During COVID-19, we reviewed remote job coaching. And I would encourage anyone who wanted more information on that to check that out on the employer's resource page at ood.ohio.gov. But I will very briefly touch on a few points. Job coaching has been provided remotely even prior to COVID-19, especially in those facilities where coaching is not practical and when a candidate does not need or want coaching on site. Technology has greatly increased the ability of remote job coaches through the use of apps that allow an employee to program a list of things to do using pictures and words or audio clips for short instructions. And there are apps that provide reminders. And the use of smartphones allows for communication between the employee and the job coach through phone calls, video conferences, and text messaging. This allows for spontaneous conversations when an employee has questions or encounters an unexpected circumstance on the job.
Dustin, last week in OOD's newsletter, there was a success story highlighting the use of technology with remote job coaching. Can you tell us a little more about this?
Yeah, this is an example of using remote job coaching with an employee with an intellectual disability who is working in a fast food restaurant. The technology that is used in this scenario is an application called MeMinder that is downloaded onto a smart device. This app offers the use of pictures and word prompts to help the employee stay on track as he or she completes daily tasks at the worksite, which include cleaning and assisting customers. The job coach is able to monitor the employee's progress with completing tasks from a remote location.
What a great way to use technology to continue with providing job coaching in a remote way, especially right now due to the pandemic. Thank you, Dustin. Okay, let's take a break now to see what additional questions we've received. Our first question is, how does a job coach not disclose to the individual's coworkers that they have a disability? How are they introduced to the business employees?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first off, it's the employee with a disability. It's his or her decision to disclose information about his or her disability to their coworkers. So when I've been a job coach when I've job coached in various areas, if I got questions from an employee's coworkers about what I was doing there, I might just answer that I'm helping train this person using some of that language that's kind of common for new employees in any workplace. It might be helpful for businesses to let employees know ahead of time that there's going to be an additional person helping to train the new employee, or helping to train an employee, so that coworkers are not like nervous about what is this stranger doing in our workplace. But yeah, it's up to the employee with the disability to decide how much to disclose or not to disclose to coworkers.
Great, and if I could add to that, Dustin, we have in other trainings talked about when you're in that interactive process with an employee with a disability and determining what the reasonable accommodation is, it can be helpful to just address disclosure, because sometimes the disability may be invisible and not obvious to coworkers, but the reasonable accommodation itself might be apparent, and that could just lead to questions that coworkers naturally have. And so if you bring up disclosure with the employee with the disability during the interactive process, you can address how they feel about that and really understand what their preference is on if they want coworkers to know anything at all or just a limited amount of information. So that's a good time to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is, if a job coach leaves, but then the employee starts to struggle again, is the employer able to reach out to the job coach, or is it the employee that needs to reach out?
So it can really be either person. Back when I worked more in the job coaching field, both situations occurred where maybe an employee had gotten some new job tasks and they were not comfortable with learning those new tasks on their own, and so they would sometimes call and say, hey, could someone come help me review these new tasks and learn them at my job site. But on the reverse side, sometimes employers call and say, hey, this employee has been great and we love having him or her on our staff, but it seems like their work is slowing down a little bit, or not up to the quality that it used to be. Could we have someone come in and refresh some of their skills? And so either way, the employer or the employee could reach out to the job coach.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is, what is an appropriate time to ask for reasonable accommodations? Is it inappropriate to mention it during an interview?
So if the individual with the disability is choosing to disclose their disability during an interview, again, that's their choice and their decision. Some people with kind of some of the more apparent disabilities may choose to address their disability in the interview process in order to allow the employer in order to help the employer understand how they're going to do the job while also having a disability. Do you have anything to add to that, Julie?
I do. The way the question's phrased, I'm not sure if it's from the employee or the employer perspective. So as an employee, you are able to request a reasonable accommodation at any point in the hiring process or the employment process. And as we all know, not every person that has a disability needs an accommodation at work. And sometimes they don't need an accommodation until something changes, like we talked about earlier, either a change in the workplace or a change with the disability. And so when it's appropriate to ask is really when the person feels they need one and they feel ready to disclose and ask for that accommodation. As far as whether it's appropriate to mention during an interview, as Dustin mentioned, again, that's a person's personal choice if they want to disclose. From the employer's standpoint, during that interview, before you offer the job, all of your questions really should be focused on, performing the job itself. And then after you make an offer, anything you would ask that might be medical in nature or disability related should be asked of all employees that have been offered that job in that job category. We did provide a training on inclusive hiring that's listed and archived on our website that can provide additional information for interviews, and certainly offline, I'm happy to talk with anyone that has some additional questions. Okay, Dustin, just a couple more questions before we wrap up today. Okay. What is the cost to an employer for utilizing a job coach?
Nothing. So just like the job developer, OOD, when OOD is working with the job coach, OOD pays for those services.
Okay, and then another question is about if the job coach, because they're on site at the employer location, if they get injured on site, who's responsible for the workers' compensation coverage?
So the job coach should have workers' comp insurance through the agency that they work for, and so that the place where the job coach actually works, not the work site at which they're helping the employee, that organization should provide the workers' comp insurance. So not the place where they're job coaching, but the place where they are actually hired by and paid for.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. Another question. As an employer, I am interested in some recommendations to ensure the health and safety of a job coach working on site.
Yeah, so I think job coaches should be expected to follow the same health and safety procedures as any other employees at that work site. And so whatever policies are put in place to protect the employees that are paid by that work site should be put in place for that job developer. During the COVID-19 pandemic, if employees are required to wear masks, then that job coach should certainly be required to wear a mask as well. And then, I've worked with people in the past who organizations that required their employees to wear closed-toed shoes on a daily basis. And so if a job coach came and wasn't wearing closed-toed shoes, then that job site would ask the job coach to go home and put on some closed-toed shoes before they came back to work in that facility.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, I think we have time to fit one more question in, and this is asking, is there a recommended frequency for a job coach and the employer to meet and discuss the employee's progress?
So that varies on a case-by-case basis. Each individual might have a different set of needs or requests from their job coach. So certainly when the job coach is first coming to the work site, they should meet with the employee and the employer to kind of get a plan together for how they're going to assist the employee and make sure they understand the responsibilities of that employee. But from that point on, it could be as frequently or as infrequently as the employer or the employee feels is necessary. The only other time that I'd say is probably pretty standard is the job coach should try to meet with the employer and the employee before before starting to fade out of the facility in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as how the tasks are being accomplished and how well the employee is doing.
Great, thank you. Well, I know we're near the end of our time, and I know that you have some closing thoughts you'd like to share.
I do, Julie. Thank you. So we discussed many of the services and resources available to employees with disabilities if they need help finding or retaining employment. We at OOD just want to be a resource for you and hope you call on us if needed. In addition, we hope you come away from this training with a better understanding of the roles of a job coach and job developer. They each can be instrumental in helping your business create a diverse workforce and support your employees to be successful. And we also hope you found the best practices for working with job developers and job coaches during the COVID-19 pandemic helpful in keeping all of your employees safe. It has been my pleasure to share this time with you. And Julie, it has been great to co-present with you today. Thank you.